In this paper, my colleagues and I focus on investigating bots and coordinated influence campaigns during the 2019 and 20 protests in Iran. These protests were arguably the largest protests in the past 40 years, and when they were happening, we used a combination of keywords and hashtags in English, Persian, and Arabic to collect over 5 million tweets posted between November 2019 and January 2020. And the main focus for us was to map the clusters in this network and identify the different communities, and of course, to investigate instances of automated activity, bots, and bot like accounts. Starting from the network of retweets, we could qualitatively examine the 20 largest clusters and identify what they were tweeting about. A few of these clusters are quite interesting. There's the pro-regime cluster that is more isolated and separate than the rest of the network. There's a lot of internal retweeting in that cluster, but it is not heavily retweeted by the rest of the network. There's also the militant organization based outside Iran, the MEK, that tries to hijack these protests and buy itself some political power. It actively retweets other opposition groups and, of course, the US Republicans. And the bulk of the network is, of course, the protesters, digital activists, journalists living outside Iran, and mainstream US media. Using Botometer, we focused on identifying bots and bot-like accounts in these clusters, and we found that two of these clusters have a large proportion of bots and bot-like accounts. And this was confirmed both by the usual Botometer scores and the more conservative CAP scores. One of these clusters, shown in red, is the pro-Iranian regime accounts that had a high proportion of bots and bot-like accounts, and the other cluster is an Arabic-speaking cluster that turned out to be tweeting mostly Islamic prayers and verses of the Quran, but because Persian and Arabic share similar words, it was in our dataset, but it wasn't really actively tweeting about the protests. The next steps in this study for us is, of course, to do a more in-depth qualitative and discourse analytical investigation of tweets by each of these clusters, and use our tools to look for evidence of coordinated inauthentic behavior, and especially focus on the time during the internet shutdown in the protests. Thank you, and we're looking forward to your questions.